The Retirement Cafe podcast, immersive and authentic travel experiences with David Adams. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast with me, your host, Justin King. If you're thinking about your retirement or already retired, you're in the right place. My aim is to help you plan for and live a successful and meaningful retirement. Retirement is far more than just a financial event. It's a significant life event, a major transition, which will bring with it new challenges and opportunities. So each episode contains tips, information, and inspiration to help you feel more informed and confident about your retirement. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. It's great to have you here. Before I get into this week's episode, I would love to thank N Cook all the way from Malaysia for his review of the Retirement Cafe podcast. He wrote, "Fantastic podcast. Thanks for all the great info and advice you share about retirement. I particularly enjoyed your episode with Chris Tiley, which was episode number 147 for anyone who would like to check that out. All about strength training in later life and called Never Too Old to Lift." So, on to this week's conversation, which is with the fascinating David Adams of Arcadia Expeditions, who joined me all the way from Sydney, Australia. David is a very well-known filmmaker and photojournalist with a string of incredible documentaries under his belt. He specialises in expeditions to remote regions. He has a passion for archaeology, anthropology, and history, which has taken him to exotic locations worldwide, including Iran, Siberia, the Pacific Rim, Northern and Central Africa, in search of indigenous peoples and their disappearing cultures. David even served as a war correspondent in Afghanistan and Georgia for a period. Alongside travel industry expert David Mannix, David founded Arcadia Expeditions to create truly immersive and authentic travel experiences. In our conversation, David shares his passion for adventure and investigating the world around us. He explains Arcadia Expeditions' mission and the types of trips they organise, and why he believes meaningful and purposeful travel experiences can act as a catalyst for a more fulfilling life. So if you are seeking more adventure in your life, I'm sure you're going to enjoy my conversation with David Adams. Welcome to the Retirement Cafe podcast, David Adams.
Thank you so much. Very kind of you to have me along.
Well, we're really looking forward to chatting to you, David. And obviously you're in, I think you're in New South Wales at the moment, in Australia. That's right, in Sydney. And so that's really grateful for you to join me after hours. So David, for those who don't know you, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, look, I'm a photojournalist and filmmaker. I started life in my 20s picking up a camera, and I ended up in the Georgian Civil War, of all places, with the Soviets on the border. And I was, they closed the borders, and I ended up being the only journalist there. And so I photographed and wrote a story for papers here in Australia, the Australian. And that really sort of began a photojournalistic career, which I was traveling, I suppose, for 10 years as a professional photojournalist. Had an agent in Amsterdam who was syndicating my articles. And then down the track, Discovery Channel, I met someone in Discovery Channel, and they were really interested about making a documentary series about what it was like to be a photojournalist. And so we made a series called Journeys to the Ends of the Earth, which still shows around the traps. And it was going to remote places that often were in conflict, but looking at the history and the culture behind that conflict. And then since then, I've really been making sort of big history documentaries. We did a series called Alexander's Lost World, which was largely shot in Afghanistan over about 5 years. And that was looking at what happened to Alexander the Great in Central Asia and Afghanistan. And obviously it was the time of the occupation. So we were looking at a then and now approach. Often the Americans were representative of the the Greco-Macedonians, and the Afghans were the Bactrians. So it was a big history series that really sort of delved into that time. And more recently, documentaries on people like Tamerlane and Attila the Hun, Charlemagne, that sort of thing. So it tends to be big history,
Wow.
but lots of fun.
Yeah, yeah. So you're what we would call well-traveled.
Yes, look, it's funny though. You think that you've traveled a lot. I mean, I think, I'm somewhere above 100 countries, but then if you put a pin on a map, you realize that there's a hell of a lot that you actually haven't seen. I think, I don't know what the record is for someone traveling to the most countries, but, you're only effectively spending a little time in one place, and somewhere like Brazil, is enormous. So the coverage on the map is very small.
Yeah, yeah. And I know a lot of our listeners and viewers of us on YouTube as well. The retired kind of community. A lot of people, as they approach retirement, they are thinking about that. That trip of a lifetime. They're thinking about, that opportunity that maybe they haven't had, especially because of the more far-flung places. You really need to donate time, don't you? And of course, our classic working life is, 4 weeks off vacation or holiday, whichever word you want to use, doesn't allow big trips or often have big trips. So they're often thinking about those types of things. Which hence one of the main reasons I want to talk to you about, of course, is your company Arcadia Expeditions. So tell me about that.
Well, look, Arcadia came about. I through friends met a guy called David, another David, and he'd been running Intrepid, that very large international company for many years in different parts of the world. And he wanted to do something different. And so we put our heads together and came up basically with an idea of documentaries without the camera crew. So do everything that you get in a documentary, but take people on that trip. So really immersive, go into archaeological digs, meet amazing people, go to places of, completely, you need special permits to get into, like a doco. And then the other idea was, it was to be a movable feast. So like a dinner table, every night we'd be at some amazing place, and then we would bring extraordinary people to the table. And so this idea of then, having only 10, 12, 16 people and being in all these remote places, and let's say you're in Botswana and the head of the Rhino Foundation comes for dinner, and then the next day you go out and maybe he's darting rhinos. And a lot of that's unscripted. We don't promise that in the trips because, you never, he's a busy guy. But we have agreements with those sort of people. So look, if you can join us, come and meet our guests, and maybe we'll go out and see what the work you're doing. So it's a very sort of immersive type of travel. We think it's really unusual. And particularly the small group means that a few friends can get together and fill the trip. Or do it privately. So it's just a different approach, we think.
Yeah, yeah, and looking on your website, the list of countries that you go to, it's quite amazing. And also, I kind of imagine that when I look at the list, I think to myself, oh wow! I wonder what it's like even to try and put together a trip to go to there. So having someone with some expertise in that area, I can imagine is significant.
Yeah, like I think the most important thing is having the people on the ground, and we've had a network from filmmaking and also from David's experience where we knew the people in Sudan, we knew the people in Turkmenistan, we know the people in Iran, we've worked with them, and so we could trust them immediately. And I think that's fundamental because we're not, because with these trips we're telling great stories. They're all led by leading academics from around the world, or writers. So we put a lot into that, and we need to know that we can basically provide it. That story of Alexander and the Persians when you go to Iran. Is led by a guy who's been to Iran 30 times, and he's a professor of Persian history. But he's a hell of a lot of fun to be with as well.
Sure. So, how do you? And I did have a little look at one of the one of the trips that you do to Namibia, because I have been to Namibia myself and spent 3 weeks, with tracking black rhino, in fact, and staying with the Kalahari bush people, and I just looking at the trip and looking at the names, and I'm just thinking, wow, what an amazing experience. And then as I kind of the list expanded of all the countries, going to Botswana, going to Afghanistan, going to Iran. Where does someone start?
Well, look, I think it depends on your interest. I mean, the story is I guess the beginning, if you're interested in that story. But then these aren't lecture tours anyway. We're still staying in best available accommodation, that sort of thing. But some people are really up for a big land adventure. They want to go and cross Kenya and Ethiopia, and don't mind being in four-wheel drives and camping, even though it's quite luxurious camping. And other people want to sort of take it slower. So we've really tried to provide a variety of trips. If you're doing Kipling and you're following the story of Rudyard Kipling and the Raj in India, you're staying at beautiful, palace hotels, old Mughal houses, that sort of thing. So some of them are really out and out adventures where, when we cross the Ethiopian border into Kenya, for instance, the vehicles meeting us have traveled 1,000 Ks. It takes about 4 days just to meet us, and then we travel back through. So where other trips like Georgia, which is a food and wine tour, is this wonderful sort of immersive, easy pace tour where you're going into monasteries and tasting back vintages and going mushroom picking with shepherds. And so they really are for all taste. I think probably about half of our trips are big expeditions that, for instance, Sudan, where you explore all the pyramids and the necropolises of Sudan, North Sudan. Where others are much, more refined, let us say, like, Vietnam or Cuba.
So there's a couple of things I'm thinking here. I'm thinking, am I fit enough? What if something goes wrong, and how fit do I need to be to do one of these trips or these expeditions? And then the next thing is maybe you can cover as well is safety. I'm worried, some of the countries you've mentioned, I'm worried about safety. I hear about, lots of dodgy things going on in the news. Can you look after me?
Well, look, I mean, I guess the comfort aspect is paramount to people. Your first question. We class the trips as sort of easy, moderate, and active. And active really is you're someone who is happy to do 3 hours, 4 hours in a four-wheel drive in a day, and you don't mind a bit of rough roads and things, or traveling in the desert. But none of the trips are sort of trekking or anything like that. So we're not asking you to walk for 6 hours or anything like that. It's all vehicle orientated. The group, I suppose the audience we find, the guests that this really appeals to, is sort of 45 to fit 75. And, often with a bit more time in their hands, but a lot of our trips are just 12 or 14 days as well. So they'll fit into a smaller trip. So we give a lot of thought into what happens to you on the trip. So that drive time, afternoons off by the pool, traveling is very much like music. It's full of mood and pace and highlights and drama. And when you plan a great trip, you've got to consider all those things. People, by day 3, jet lag hits them. And the last thing they want to do is look at a museum for 2 hours. What they want to do is have a nice drink by the pool. And then the next day, a late get up, and then off you are driving, and there's an early lunch stop. So that consideration is really important, not tiring people out. The safety aspect is obviously we're going to places which, in the past have had issues. We certainly don't put our clients into a situation that would endanger them at all. One also must remember that, if you look with the news reportage and news cycle, sometimes they're referring to Sudan and they're talking about South Sudan, but everybody thinks it's North Sudan, and that's 2,000 kilometers difference. So there's those aspects, but we really rely on our long-established DMCs, the management people on the ground, to give us any heads up. For instance, there was a coup in Sudan relatively recently. Right through that coup, numbers went down, but certainly people still traveled, and now the confidence is back. people are going into Sudan again. And there are some countries have that little edge, I guess, that you aren't going to run into a lot of people in North Sudan, but no Westerner has ever had a problem, been arrested or that sort of thing. A tourist has never had a problem in North Sudan. So Iran's the same. It covers there's a lot of reporting about Iran. And, as English speakers, Americans, English and Australians, we sort of get a lot more of that. And then you arrive in Iran and you go to the markets and there's all these French and Italians and Spanish who don't get that sort of news cycle or don't have that kind of, post embassy hangover of Iran. And they're sort of going, oh no, the English are coming or the Australians are coming. They're finally, getting the confidence to come. So I think that's one of the things. You obviously do your homework and you want to be comfortable about where you travel, but don't necessarily be put off by news cycles or particular reporting. I think in most cases, if you've got a good expedition, a tried and tested team, you're going to be fine.
Yeah. And how do you select? You may be on a lot of these trips yourself, or how do you select the tour leader?
Well, our tour leaders, we call them storytellers because we really are creating a story that they tell. So in Sudan, for instance, it's the story of the 3 Niles, and everybody, pretty much knows that they know of 2, which is the White and the Blue Nile, but people didn't know that most people don't know that there's a Yellow Nile or was a Yellow Nile. So that's the story, and that's what we go and investigate. But what we're after, it takes us a long time to actually settle on a leader because we want them, usually they're an academic, but some academics can be really dry. And in a lecture tour or a lecture theatre, you're kind of falling asleep. So we're looking for people with lots of passion and dynamism, and they can be 45 or 70. And often they're writers, people that have come to a subject through their own passion and they've become an expert in that. But we meet with them a number of times, and it's kind of like you and I. We sit down and have these sort of conversations, and we pretty quickly work out that they what they'd be like on a trip, and how much they would be comfortable and invest in people, because it's sort of that two-way street. With those small groups, the dynamic is really fundamental, and it's great because you come because that story interests you. And then you've got this expert who's passionate. And so it sort of lights everybody up. So there's this great sort of kindred spirit that happens on these trips. But the leaders, their storytellers are really important, and they're men and women of all ages, depending on their expertise and their passion.
What's your favorite expedition?
Well, look, I think Iran, changes everybody's life because, that whole sort of, we come from that Greek historical, cultural perspective of our history. And when you immerse yourselves in what was the other empire, the Persians, and then because of the sort of geopolitics of the last 50 years meant that Iran has been to varying degrees isolated. It's like going to a different planet in many ways. But so visually and all that sort of thing, you're sort of blown away. But I always say with the Iranians, it's like the Italians, like traveling in Italy, but without the wine. They're of that character. They're just joyous, full of life, that sort of thing. And you're sort of surprised by basic things like there's freeways everywhere. I mean, it runs really well. It's a really beautiful country. The food is to die for. So it's I think what we're asking guests to think about is put aside your preconceptions, do your research, but going to these places that are much more off the beaten track and journeying through story really is the most rewarding sort of travel. Rather than sort of going somewhere and, what'll I do? Let's go and look at that museum. If that's all linked up for you so that often we go to the first night is a great dinner, usually in a big museum. We get special permission to go into the grand hall and we have dinner there and the head of the museum shows us around. But that sets up our story. And then for the next, week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you've got that in your mind's eye of this sort of what you saw in the museum, and then it all comes to life. So I think that's one of the things we want to do, is push away those preconceived ideas about places like Iran. Sudan is magical. There's more pyramids in Sudan than there are in Egypt. And the difference is you go into one of the big temples, like the Temple of Soleb, and there's no footprints there. There's no other tourists there. You're the only people in that enormous ruined temple. And there are necropolises and pyramid fields all over the place. So, and sometimes, even the beautiful little lodge we stay in, I think it has total of 16 rooms. So you might have a couple of other travelers, but that's it in that town. And so it's a different sort of travel. And being on the Nile, experiencing that life, just sailing on a felucca down to and passing these ancient ruins, that is extraordinary. It's their life experiences.
Amazing. And how, travel has become a little bit, people have a lot of environmental concerns at the moment with travel and air travel especially. How do you kind of balance that kind of conflict, I suppose, that people have got around, the kind of ethical, social governance kind of thoughts about travel to far-flung places?
Well, look, we're initiating, as people can read on our website, we're initiating a carbon neutral approach to what we're doing. We also, in every location, we go and visit and encourage our guests to be involved in a charity or a community project. And the stories relate that way as well. So, for instance, when we're traveling from Kenya down, from Ethiopia down to Kenya, we're looking at the story of the evolution of mankind. And we meet 18 different tribal peoples that are living on the land now, but also under the ground is 3 million year old humanoids that we then go and see at the Leakey-based institute. And that's Richard Leakey and Louis Leakey, who made all those amazing discoveries in the sort of 60s and 70s. But they've got a big outreach program that in the middle of nowhere on Lake Turkana. So we stay there for a couple of nights. We donate quite a large amount of money from the trip to that charity. And then we encourage our guests to then connect with that. And then the same thing when we're in Nairobi, on a different trip, we take everybody in for an afternoon into the slums of Kibera, and they get to understand what it's like life in there. And there are lots of community projects in there that they can become involved in. So our idea really is that, that old adage of leave only footprints and take only photos, but that idea that you become involved, you meet those people, you have lunch with them, and then if you want to, you can continue that relationship. You might donate, you might sponsor, whatever it is. So every trip we do has those sort of offerings, and that's really important in travel, particularly to remote places where you've got this disparity of Western wealth and third world poverty, that sort of thing. So if you understand and travel through a land and understand its culture, understand its history, meet the people, really get to know them, have empathy for them, and then you get to interact and maybe help them, that is a great reason to travel. It's not, yes, there's, airfares and there's fuel that you use, but it's a balance. It's I think that if you cease to travel and you cease to go to those places, they become more isolated, they fall off the map, they're not funded. It's people like you and I going to somewhere in remote Sudan and realizing that for $75 you could put another well in that town, and you go, here's $75. You've put a well in someone's town. But you don't necessarily do that. I mean, often people do that, just online, or they feel they have a conscience to do that. It's entirely different when you are there in that town and you provided that for them. And it can be, you buying them some chickens or whatever it is. It's not charity. It's assisting them to build microfinance, all that sort of thing. And we really, we don't push it on people, and it's their choice. But we put them in the environment where they can experience that and be involved in that.
Yeah, brilliant. Obviously, we'll give a link out in a minute for the websites because there's a huge amount of information there. What would a trip cost typically?
Look, we're sort of in the range of the sort of $1,000 a day. And some of our trips, like Iran, is quite a bit less than that. I think it's more like 750, 800 US a day. And then some trips are more towards 1,500. A lot of it depends on the logistics. If you're involving helicopter or what those things, obviously change it a bit. But we're also, the accommodation, as I mentioned earlier, it's best available. So there might be and we don't do sort of 5-star hotels, chain hotels. We'd always look for converted castles and old traders' houses and all those sort of things that we put in. But there may be a reason that we're off into the eastern desert to see, as we do in Sudan, we go off to see on the Yellow Nile. We see this 800 BC fortress, and we camp underneath it for the night. Wow. And so you're in pup tents for the night, but that experience to be in the Western Sahara underneath this incredible fortress on the Yellow Nile is worth that small hardship. Yeah. So it's very much we try and choose places that are either full of character or are very much fitting with the story. But that's about basically the price point.
Okay,
about $1,000 US, around that.
And where have you got new places that you're exploring at the moment?
We do. We've just put on a Colombian trip, which is fantastic, and it's looking at El Dorado and the legend of the Golden King and that sort of thing. A beautiful trip in Colombia. We're just refining a trip in northern Pakistan, which is sort of based on Lost Horizons and James Hilton's book, but the city that he finds obviously is still out there somewhere magically. But we have a sort of more archaeological bent. So we go to the most amazing archaeological sites in the north of Pakistan. We start in Lahore, and then we head up into Skardu and Chitral and Zanskar, and those amazing sort of valleys, Hunza, because that again is it's much more peaceful there. It's all doable. And Serena Hotels, for instance, wonderful chain of hotels around the world. They've gone in and done up some castles, so you're staying in really nice accommodation in northern Pakistan. And the mountain scenery, the valleys, the desert valleys, and then the rich farming areas. It's breathtaking. We're also we have a trip which is from Jordan down into Saudi Arabia, a cross-border one, and that's because the Nabatean civilization and the Romans also, they all spread down there, and for all this time that Saudi's been shut, they've been, basically holding on to these incredible ruins that are like Petra in Jordan. So it's a cross-border trip where you can see that whole civilization. And then we've got a shorter sort of 12-day trip, which is just experiencing the culture of Saudi Arabia. And then we have sort of trips that one is exploring by helicopter, going up into the Tibetsi Mountains of Chad, where there are isolated communities of crocodiles living in the middle of the desert in these mountain ranges. Beautiful rock art, and that's led by a world-leading rock art expert, a lovely guy called David Coulson. So, yeah, we're bringing on more. We bring on probably 2 or 3 more trips every year, and we do bring on a big expedition one, and then we'll do a couple of sort of 12-day, 14-day ones. Papua New Guinea, for instance, is a fantastic expedition, and I think a lot of people dream of going to Papua New Guinea, but it's so remote and it takes a long time to get there. But that experience is the Sepik River, the highlands, and then the remote islands. And there's an amazing ritual they do called it's the Kula Trading Ring, where that's been going on for 1,000 years, and they trade clockwise and anti-clockwise. And when the trading communities meet, they have these sort of festivals on the different islands. And we've hijacked one of the meeting points, and we go out there for 2 days, and we're there as this trading goes on in the remote islands of New Guinea. So we look for these extraordinary kind of events and things, and when we find a great story, we'll bring it online. Yeah,
and I'm finding your your description enthralling. I just kind of imagine that you may have some real regulars who keep coming back for the next trip,
Well, in fact, we do. We have, for instance, a wonderful Texan lady called Tanya, who is in her early 70s. She's got some mobility issues, so we do sort of special arrangements with her. We can get she's doing Sudan, for instance, early next year, and we get her much closer to the pyramids, so she's not having to walk just as far as things. But she's just lined them up. We're just releasing a Moroccan trip, which is all about the art of living in Morocco over the last 1,000 years, and so it's led by this wonderful artisan, and he takes us into the most incredible places that you would never get access to. So she signed up for that, Sudan and Saudi Arabia, and she's just basically doing 2 a year as she sort of ticks off her bucket list, which is lovely. And we can when we have repeat clients, we get to know them, they get to know us, and we tweak things for them. In the things that they like, she's unique because she just wants to travel alone with our storyteller. So it's her with in this case Ian, who is a Scotsman but has this wonderful record of digging in Sudan and things, and it's just the two of them going off for 3 weeks exploring the ruins of northern Sudan.
Wow, amazing. Yeah. So for anyone who is as enthralled as I am in all these wonderful trips of adventure, where do they find out more about you and Arcadia Expeditions?
Well, if you just online and you go www.arcadiaexpeditions.com, you'll see all our trips and offerings there, and there's links to films and other documentaries and things like that. You can get kind of a larger picture of what we're about.
Brilliant. Well, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, David. I thank you so much for your time, and I hope people are inspired to hit the website and as I have, and just enjoy the photography that your website has. It's absolutely marvelous. And maybe if they hadn't caught the documentary from a number of years ago, maybe they can find that on the Discovery Channel as well. So, but anyway, fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
A big thank you to David for sharing his story and telling us more about Arcadia Expeditions. To find the show notes with links to the Arcadia Expeditions website and details of how to connect with David, head over to our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk. As ever, if you've enjoyed this episode, please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, as it really helps more people like you find us. And for more interviews and retirement planning videos, you may want to check out my YouTube channel, search for Justin King MFP, or you can click the link in the show notes. So until next time, I'm Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.